All right, it is still April 10th, 2026, and this is Senate Committee on Institutions. And our last item for the day is Nick Kramer. Thank you very much for being here on such short notice. And we'll be discussing the letter of April 8th from the Agency of Administration.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Glad to be here. For the record, Nick Kramer, Chief Operating Officer for the Agency of Administration. Glad to be back with the committee. So I'll defer to you, Madam Chair, in terms of what's helpful in terms of format. I can walk through the letter, kind of top to bottom, or I can respond to questions that committee members have. What's the best use of your time?
A walkthrough would be perfect. Thank you.
So, as the chair mentioned, so this is a letter that we send typically. We've sent over the last couple of years. It sort of mirrors a letter that we send to your colleagues across the hall in the Appropriations Committee as the major appropriations bills, both that one and the capital bill, make a crossover. Inevitably, there are items on which the administration would like to comment and bring to your attention based on changes made by the House to the governor's recommend. And so that's really what this highlights, are not everything that all the changes made by the House, but the things that kind of rise to the top for the administration in terms of maybe meriting a little further discussion and wanting to make sure that this committee is considering and doing their own analysis on it. So,
And we just started.
Okay.
Thank you.
So right at the top, I would highlight, and it's short in terms of real estate on the letter, but that belies the importance. I do want to emphasize, this committee will not be shocked to hear me say this, given I've been in here for years advocating for the CAF fund, and it's a top priority for the administration. We were thrilled to see that for the first time since it was created, the House fully funded the statutory cash fund transfer. So the governor's recommend every year has proposed the full statutory amount. In recent years, a portion of that has been redirected for other priorities. We were really pleased to see this year that the entirety of that transfer is retained in the capital bill. We see that as a really positive development and something we hope will continue. So wanting to start with that, start on a good note, really appreciate your House colleagues on that. And frankly, it's even more important. I think it's the type of fiscal discipline we all can really rally around in uncertain times as our revenue sources become more mercurial. It's ongoing instability in the federal space. There are little things like this that we can do to tighten up our own financial ship, make a huge difference. So I'll say that at the outset. The major theme to the next items that I'll talk about, and there really aren't that many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things we've called out in this letter. Inevitably, there are differences between the governor's recommended priorities and those that emerge in the legislature. That's the typical nature of this process and the balance of power between the branches. So we're used to that. What's kind of interesting and notable this year, the House, as this committee knows, spends a lot of time looking at project timing, cash flow typically. And in prior years, as they make adjustments to the governor's recommend, one of the things they most often cite, or I'd say from my perspective, that they most often cite as justification for those adjustments that they make is, oh, well, this project's not quite ready, or we, in the time even, and that's not just a difference of opinion. Sometimes it can be a difference in information between when we're preparing the capital bill in the fall and the early winter, and even the couple months while the House is working on it. Facts change, various projects move forward or don't move forward. So there can be reasons for that, but they look really closely at, like, when is money going out the door? Will it go out the door by the end of the budget period? And sometimes they've made the choice, well, we think this isn't quite ready, but this other thing is. So we're going to move money there. And that's something we see often. And we don't always agree with those moves, but that's how that dynamic is unfolded. So it's notable that this year there are a couple projects for which the House has taken money away from a project that from our perspective is really like in flight and happening, and there's a signed contract in some place, there's like projects are moving forward. And then in other cases, they've taken that money and they've put it in projects that are important, but don't necessarily have quite as immediate a time frame. And I'll highlight what those are. But I think that's just a theme to me, and that we were kind of scratching our chins a little bit because it's divergence from past practice for the House. So starting with DOC statewide door controls, the House reduced this item from the governor's recommend by $2 million. The funding we had proposed in the governor's recommendation was to help finish door control replacements at the Northeast Correctional Facility and also Caledonia Community Work Camp, which are, as the committee knows, cited on the same plot in St. Johnsbury. That work has been ongoing. There are prior appropriations for this project. Door controls generally are a big piece of work, and we've been chipping away at it over the last couple of capital bill cycles, moving from facility to facility. So this was the latest installment in money necessary to finish that work. And I don't know if the committee heard earlier from DOC today.
Yes.
Did we talk about this project?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I can be brief, but from our perspective, the challenge is we have a signed construction management contract. We are in the process of fleshing out the rest of the project. If we don't have the guarantee of this money moving forward, what the project team will have to do is postpone, I believe there's a phase of bidding, and this could result in a delay of 6 to 8 months. So the committee probably heard in more detail than what I just said on this, but that was surprising to see a reduction there, given the fact that the project is in flight. So I'll pause in case there's a question.
I do, and then I looked at, what the House, their idea looking what we have, and I know you don't have these, but there were PowerPoints that were presented, the PowerPoint presented to the House during markup regarding this project, indicated essentially that there was, I'm gonna say, $4 million-ish that had already been appropriated, and only a little less than 300,000 was expended. And what we had today was of the prior appropriations, what was unexpended was about 150,000. So I asked Joe Agent, how did that $4 million get spent in a couple of weeks?
Yeah.
And it sounds like the contract was signed after the House had, I guess, completed their discussion, and now. So my real question on that is, why didn't the House know that was going to happen? And was the decision to do that made after the House made their decision?
I would defer the program staff on the exact timing of when the contracts were in negotiation and issued, but I'll speak at a high level, Senator, to your question. Working backwards, I'm not aware of a decision that was made in response to any action or taken by the body. Generally, I'll say we treat the capital bill process as pending legislation, right? Things can change in the House, they can change here in the Senate, they can change during the committee of conference if there is one. So we typically don't take action anticipating something that would happen in legislation until there's a signed bill on the Secretary of State's.
Thank you for that answer, because that was the first thing that came up.
Yeah, well,
Why did this contract get signed?
I could see obviously what I will say, because I appreciate the question, because I think this is a good point to make in this capital space. And one of the challenges, frankly, that this committee and the House counterparts have as you're trying to make decisions is that the nature of capital spending as compared, say, to the operating budget is longer. It takes longer to get projects out the door. And it's not always as linear. Things like this do happen, right? If you have a large project, and we have assigned, as of the time I was writing this, we had a signed construction management contract. Once you sign a contract for the actual construction, that can be a big dollar amount, right? So there are these milestones that you can pass as these projects move forward where large amounts get expended. So it's hard sometimes, even for us, as I, from the administration, meet with departments and try to look at outstanding balances, try to get a sense of where projects are, to do that analysis to say, okay, here's what was appropriated, here's what's left. Does that give us a good projection of how much more, like, if, for example, if you spent $1 million in 6 months out of $5 million, does that mean in the next 6 months you're going to spend another $1 million? The answer is often no, right? Depending on the construction season and the pace of the work and which contracts are signed, the pace of expenditure can really vary. So I suspect, again, and I'm just saying, hypothesizing at a high level, that may be what happened in this instance. That if you've got more detailed questions, that Joe would be a great person to get back to.
But to Senator Plunkett's question, I think the House may have made a different decision if they at least knew on the spectrum where it was. And I don't know, and I could be wrong, probably wrong, you probably know better than I do, if they were made aware of where in the process it was. And so, I mean, that was, I think it was a absence of communication.
Could very well be, Senator. Yeah, and I'll own that it is a challenge to the tracking of all of every
Yes.
projects.
Absolutely. I mean, and I didn't mean to give the indication that should have happened, but I'm just saying to this specific item that may have been the situation. It is a monumental tax.
Heard and appreciated, and I'm glad that we have the opportunity now to provide some clarification.
And that, okay.
Yes.
So on that item, I'm just kind of going back in time more now, this, because it's highlighted, that was in the governor's recommend, that was a new item. Is that accurate, or was it changed?
This,
Because it's,
If, my apologies, again, Scott Moore, JFO, if it's in beige, the GovRec changes from the act we had last year.
right.
And the statewide door controls as a broader category was new this year. So you're gonna see a beige where the governor had wanted to add 2.7 million. And then also a yellow where it went down to just 7,000.
All right, and,
So you'll see two colors.
right, and we're actually three then, because it's the white is what it was previous. When it was in bonded dollars,
so that's a different line item, Madam Chair.
right,
But confusingly, it is in this case for the same project.
right,
The reason that we didn't propose an additional 2.7 million in cash, which is what we proposed down below in that same line item for the Northeast Correctional Complex, that's line 25, is because what we've realized, as I mentioned, we're going through facility by facility, and this is a body of work that needs to happen everywhere in the state. We wanted to leave, the reason we chose the word statewide door controls, knowing probably the bulk of this would go towards Northeast Correctional Facility, was to leave some flexibility so that if we come in slightly under budget or there were funds left over, we could apply whatever was left over to the next facility in line.
and that makes sense, and presuming you're tracking still somewhere. But, each facility, and so why did you put it in cash instead of keeping it in bond?
So, as I think described before to this committee, we really see cash and bonded as equivalent funding sources in the capital bill. They're pretty interchangeable. I think as I was in here a couple of months ago, highlighting for the committee when we first presented the bill, if you look at the total funding for this bill, the total new funding above what was already passed last year, it's about $33 million. And the bulk of that is cash. And because we only really had, well, we were proposing $3.3 million on bond reallocations, There was $6.8 million in bond premium. So that's about $10 million. That was really the entirety of our availability for new bonding authority. Then we had $17 million in the cash fund transfer, plus prior year fund interest, plus an additional, I think it's like it's like 6 million in cash fund reallocation. So we have 20-some million dollars of cash fund spent, and only about 10 in bonded. And so you'll see throughout the document, there are more cash fund appropriations than there are bonded, and that just reflects the availability of those funding.
All right, that's helpful. Okay,
Any other questions from committee members?
we're good.
I'll keep going. So that was one of the reductions that we, again, it's policy choice within the purview of this committee to make, but we want to be clear the impacts that will have on the project. Similarly, there was a reduction to the Northern State Correctional Facility. That's the facility in Newport, of course, boiler replacement project. The house reduced by $1 million. Did Joe and Kristen also talk about this one?
They did.
Yes. And I won't go into much detail here, other than to say we have ongoing projected costs there. This reduction means the out year costs will be greater. And for similar reasons, I believe in the door control project, which I think we facing a delay of a couple months, which of course is never ideal. So I'm happy to field any questions.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
The way I read the letter, you're looking for $3 million in the presentation that we saw from Joe was $2 million.
He had mentioned it was gonna be 2 million, and they're putting another 2 million.
More next year. So I just want to be clear on what the request actually is.
Yeah, so we had, I think Senator Plunkett just hit the nail on the head. We were requesting $2 million in FY 27 with the understanding that we would be back next year when we do the next capital bill, asking for another $2 million. So a total of $4 million. What I think is meant to be communicated in this letter is that if the House is reducing our proposed $2 million this year, this $1 million, then next year we'll have to be asking for $3 million.
All right, good, thank you. So, and then I think, to me, it seemed they're a little bit optimistic on the permitting. Because it doesn't take a lot to push that over a couple months, and then they're into the next fiscal year.
So it's like maybe a good segue, Madam Chair, to the next item,
Sure.
which is 3-acre stormwater compliance.
Everybody's favorite topic.
We all love. The important body of work to meet our total maximum daily limit obligations with the feds. The reduction here from the House was $1.5 million. You can, many members can see on the spreadsheet that happened in 2 places. They trimmed an FY 26, so that's the current fiscal year we're in, bonded appropriation. That was 1.5 million. They trimmed that by 400,000 down to 1.1. And then they also completely zeroed out a $1.1 million appropriation in FY 27. So a total reduction of 1.5 million. This is the second year in a row that the House has proposed has reduced funding for this line item. It's in the capital booklet that we presented, the detail with the 8 projects that we have to do. We have 8 BGS managed properties that meet the criteria for this 3-acre stormwater compliance. I apologize that I don't have all 8 of them memorized or at my fingertips, but they include some of the correctional facilities. I think the Middlesex property is one of them. Montpelier Complex is one of them. These are large, complex properties owned by the state with significant impervious surface. So these are not cheap remediation projects. And in some cases, I learned talking to my colleagues at DEC, it's not unheard of actually that they do the assessment and they're like, well, there's not actually a good way to do this, right? Because you look what we're talking about here is trying to direct slow stormwater down, right? So that it doesn't run off and create all kinds of problems. And there's, if the committee is interested, I'd encourage you to hear from A&R and DEC. There's a lot of rich technology in this space, different ways this can happen. But the point I think for today is that these are expensive and complicated projects. We have 8 of them in the pipeline. I believe, and I don't want to speak for the House, but my recollection is that their reductions last year to this line item were in light of the fact that there was a bill that has since passed the legislature that modified the compliance deadlines for this work. All of us across the state, anybody who has a property within 3 or more acres of impervious surface is subject to these. So this is a big deal statewide, and the legislature pushed out the timeframe for compliance on something. So we do have a couple more years than we were initially thinking to do this work. However, given the size of the projects and the complexity and all of the different things, and to your point you just made, Madam Chair, the timing to get permits in place and all the contingencies, we are concerned that any reduction to this line item may not be well advised. If anything, I mean, it means we're going to be back next year with bigger requests and really trying to move this along, as we all can't rely on the deadline being extended and through. Well, pausing is, there's that questions there.
Questions? Comments?
If you know how many permits there are right now and how many of the projects are ready to go, that can be done
Projects are
in the next year or in the next fiscal year.
I couldn't say done in the next year, Senator. I did receive a list that I don't have at my fingertips, but I'm happy to follow up with from BEC in terms of the 8 properties which are permitted already and which are still like application pending. That's not the right word, but still in process. How that status translates to project readiness, I think depends a lot on the specifics of each property and how complex the remediation is. In some cases, it may be relatively easy compared to like the Montpelier complex. I think is going to be very not easy. And that's just as a layperson.
Just to be technical.
But yeah, exactly. That's the scientific word for it.
I guess ultimately my question is of the amount that is in the governor's recommendation, how much of it is actually going to be spent?
What is ready to go? My off the cuff answer is all of it, because we wouldn't propose it if, but I wouldn't just be trying to bank money for future projects. My understanding is that at least one of them, but I think we're ready to move on several of these items, but to confirm my understanding, probably the right people to hear from again would be Joe and the people that really manage the project.
Right, so could you just, oh, sorry, go ahead. Well, it sounds, when he was discussing the Newport boiler, he talked about the ponds, and I was under the impression that the ponds were in that budget.
Yes,
But for that project,
Yes.
so that's a good, thank you, Madam Chair.
we're talking 8 projects, right?
No, I know, but they include that one here
Yeah,
in the last sentence.
one of the 8 properties that we need to remediate, Senator, is the Newport Correctional Facility. I don't have every detail on the intersection, but my understanding is that for the boiler project, which we just talked about, to go live and be operational and for them to turn on that boiler, this mitigation work needs to be completed. And so if you don't have the funding now to do that, then we could do effectively some of the boiler replacement work, but actually couldn't press go, couldn't start the new boiler, and we'd have to seek an extension or a waiver to use the existing system until we can do, I think it's wetlands construction pond that we're all.
All it's wetlands, but I think it's a pond. I mean, wetlands are just more special generally than what those look like.
So I think that's actually a good point. I'm glad both senators brought that up. There is a direct nexus, and this gets at Senator Plunkett's question between the availability of this funding and the time frame for.
So could you please get us, or have someone get us just a list of all of the projects?
Yeah, that's.
Because especially the Capitol complex, that's gonna be huge.
And what I would name on that, Senator, is the Capitol complex, as I think you heard already, maybe from somebody about, if I'm not confusing my notes. Capitol complex is in a sort of interesting moment right now as we still work through our negotiations with FEMA
Exactly.
and figuring out what the long-term vision is for remediation. So that would not be Senator Plunkett, the one we're moving on this year. We want to get that whole plan lined up, and depending on what we wind up doing there, what's the right word? Hazard mitigation is a big component of that project, and I'm not an expert, but I would imagine that that may intersect with 3-acre stormwater. You know, if we're changing building footprints and expanding or contracting parking lots, depending on what the final plan looks like, that'll have some intersection here. So from a sequencing standpoint, we want to wait to make sure we're involved.
Definitely, but it would be helpful to have a list. of all of
No,
them.
and I can.
Yeah.
And Joe did talk about this yesterday.
Okay.
Didn't ask the questions, but just one more sort of comment on this one, you know, just in terms of, expending the funds. We talked about don't bank funds, but there's about 4 million regarding these projects that hasn't been expended yet. And so that's really the question. Is it going to be I think it's requesting 6 million, something 6.2. Yeah, will that all be spent in fiscal year?
Yeah, to follow up.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So they're gonna get back to us on that.
Hopefully Cole is listening.
Calls all of us.
Yeah.
Uh,
Like our cars, we need to know that.
All right, are there any other questions from senators on this?
On 3 acre. I don't think so.
Okay. Did the committee talk with Joe and Kristen about the Wi-Fi and state correctional facilities as well? Okay. Then I'll go quickly, but share some perspective here. So, and I know Senator Harrison, you and I had a conversation about this the other day. I think this continues to be a shared priority of the administration and the legislature. I think it's not a matter of disagreeing with if we should do this project. It's a matter of the timing and the funding source. So our contention here is that DOC has been working with the community broadband board for the last couple of years to see if there's federal funding available to pull down for this project. There, as everybody knows, there's been influx of federal funding for digital accessibility stuff over the last couple of years. We also more recently, this is congressionally delegated spending season or earmarks season. DOC has submitted to the congressional delegation a request for this funding to complete this project. So there are several other possible funding sources at play that we're still trying to, the VCBB work I understand is ongoing. There's this request to the federal delegation with which we have some optimism. So it feels premature to allocate $3 million of bonded, or I guess it's cash, but capital funding, capital bill capacity to this project when there may be other federal funds we can draw on. So that's one comment. The next is just that with regards to the project itself, we're just flagging, again, this is something we intend to move forward on, but there's a lot of work to be done kind of in advance. Anytime you do anything in a correctional facility, any sort of construction, it's hard. You have to displace incarcerated individuals. There's programmatic challenges for that. Buildings themselves, as the committee very well knows, are built differently from other facilities that are hard and durable. So it's, my naive brain, I think of Wi-Fi expansion. No, you're just gonna duct tape a router to the wall, right? It's not like that at all. There may be like new server rooms involved, and those might have to be air conditioned, and so that's a whole HVAC. It's a complicated operational thing. And also from a security standpoint, these are secure facilities, and what we're contemplating is a new type of digital infrastructure in those facilities that could have intersection with those security functions. And anytime we do that, we want to be really diligent and intentional about how that's rolled out and make sure that the programmatic pieces are thoroughly analyzed and considered before the project work starts. So both ADS and BGS, who would be the ones building and managing this infrastructure, have indicated that they, even before just launching into the full construction of this, there's more planning work that they think is important to do. And I guess the last thing I'll note, sensing some questions in the room, is this also has an operating cost associated with it. This is not just like a one-time one and done. There's an annual cost that would be a base pressure in POC's budget, right? So this is not a decision, I think, to be made in isolation. Certainly it has implications on their ongoing operations. Because the House is proposing cash, I don't think this is an issue, but I just want to name for the committee, since we're talking about it, due to the nature, I don't know if my foot in my mouth, but I think it may be a rental agreement with some of the equipment, which the state actually would own, but the actual Wi-Fi equipment, that might run into issues from a bond law perspective if we were to use bonded funds for that. So cash, it may be less of an issue, but just what I'm trying to paint a picture of here is that this is not a straightforward endeavor. And generally what we're saying is just adding $3 million to make it happen. And we understand the urgency. We've heard from both chambers that this is an important project. We want to move forward. But for all the reasons just listed, we're feeling like 3 million is a little premature. We'd like a little bit more time.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt. So I absolutely understand. And if we can have a funding source that is the federal government, we'd like to have. My issue probably more than is we've been kicking this can for a significant amount of time. It's not, and I think sometimes when we look at this, we think it is just the impact, but it is the staff there is planning. And so for me, I think we need to have some time frame. If we don't get this funding, then this comes back in. I am willing for the sake of this to go, okay. But I hopefully I guess but I we don't have to spend it. Comes from front. I'm all of it. But I mean, we need to support our staff and what they do. And so I just want to.
Heard, Senator. Appreciate that.
Did you have a comment? So the federal funding probably not gonna happen, right?
No, it is gonna happen. We just got $230 million from them to do projects exactly like this right here. We just barely got the money.
Where did we get that?
It came from the Trump administration. It was all in the papers. We've got the monies to do this on the federal funds.
With the correctional facility?
With the broadband people that are especially looking to do projects like this. We have the monies there.
But when you say projects like this, my understanding of what we've already received and before what you're talking about is that it's community broadband, not
The money's there in the community broadbands. They have the dollars. We as legislatures can dictate where those dollars go. They think that they own the dollars. They don't own the dollars. We own the dollars, and we can say to them, listen, this is a project that we want to do. And we wanna have $3 million to go in, and we are allowed to do that. They don't own the dollar.
Okay, when you say they. who are you
The
talking about?
community broadband people that have these funds to expend.
Mhm.
If I might.
Yes.
I think, so there's two funding sources we're talking about here. One that's highlighted in the letter that I shared, the congressional delegated spending ask. I never want to assume that I know what our federal partners will do or, what they're thinking. And they're certainly going through similar prioritization exercises. So I couldn't give an over under on whether it's likely or not. I will say that from the state's perspective, we would not chase a federal funding opportunity that we think is incredibly unlikely. And particularly that congressionally delegated spending ask, I think there's some optimism. This, as the senator has indicated, this is something that we've been talking about for a while. I think correctional facilities generally are hard. The number of times I hear the phrase kick the can with regards to capital projects generally is frequent because of the nature, like I said, everything's slow. But particularly correctional facilities are hard because they take a really long time. Everything that already takes a long time for building a courthouse, it's not a great example because those are also complicated, but I won't say fish hatchery, right? But build something else that's quicker than correctional facility. And so all that is to say, I think we're optimistic at this point. And to the senator's point, we're happy to be in communication. We will inevitably be in communication as we know and trying to move this forward. And if we didn't get these funds, then we would have a discussion about what the alternatives are. But I think at this point, it feels prudent to let that process play out.
And when do we think we'll know?
Well, again, I can't speak for our federal partners. I think the broadband board and maybe DOC, if they didn't already comment on it, would have a better sense of the timeframe for that process. And congressionally delegated spending requests to typically a fairly quick turnaround. I mean, it's part of their budget process. So as the federal budget moves forward through its stages, much like the state budget, it becomes evident what's in and what's out. And any legislator could certainly pick up this call or Vermont delegated and express interest in this project and support. That's within everybody's prerogative.
Okay, thank you. Okay, one more.
So the final item, appreciate the committee's endurance here on a Friday afternoon, is the Blues Correctional Facility. Speaking of projects in the correctional space that are critically important, I've been in here talking about this project now for several years, and the history of this project goes back several years. This is one we all want to move forward as quickly as we can, for a variety of reasons that I won't spend a ton of time talking about here today. The issue, as the committee knows, is that we have in several communities hit roadblocks. We've been unable to find a site. That's the basic foundation we need to be able to move forward on this project. We are continually having conversations internally about different paths. There have been land searches. It's trying to think creatively. We were doing everything we can to move this forward. Until we know where we're going to build, there's just a limit on what we can spend and what we can do. We can all the permitting work, all the design work, it all is site dependent, right? So we continue to be in this liminal space here where we have significant prior year appropriations. There's about 15.5 million unspent obligated going back a couple of years. If, as we say in the letter, if tomorrow found a site, we're ready to move forward, that money would completely suffice to get us through the period of time until we're back in front of this committee asking for funding. And so to the points that have been brought up already about kind of banking money, I mean, this is a significant project. It's going to be a big undertaking and frankly demand a huge portion of the capital bill capacity we have in future years. But it feels Not appropriate to us at this point to just keep sort of parking other money aside for it, knowing that we have all these other priorities, all of these pressing things that are active and ready to go. We know that we have enough money in the bank, so to speak, that we're ready to go once the piece of the line. And so it feels not necessary to the administration at this point to put another 1.25 million here, which is what the House had proposed.
Okay. We did talk about that, a fair amount last, any questions? Comments? Okay, all right.
So that's the end of the contents of the letter. Other than to name that we're always here, appreciate partnership with the committee. I'm happy to come back anytime, so long as it's not
Except next week, when we're doing our work. But thank you for being here today.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
Of course. And if the committee has any other questions or technical stuff or cash fund, I'm your guy. So I'm happy to be of service however I can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you committee for your time.
All right, and so committee, I just wanna ask.
Question.
All right, there's,
I agree with you.
so. No, go ahead, unless you wanna stay.
Thanks.
You might have other things to do. So, next week, our goal is to finish up the capital bill by Friday. It's going to be a challenge, but I think we're up for it. I have some, I have the veterans home scheduled. John Gray is scheduled. Obviously Scott hopefully will be here.
My plan, Madam Chair,
Every day.
is to be here every day,
Okay,
so you don't even, if you mention it to Megan, you don't need to schedule me on. Be here in my corner.
okay, thank you. And then, what we've done yesterday and today, I think those are, consequential.
Yeah.
Areas, so if there's any other area,
The one thing that,
Yeah.
Chair Haynes yesterday, she did talk about the Dreamway project.
Oh.
And suggested hearing from, we did hear from certain firms, and the BTS, I think, before, but she mentioned he's the architect for the project, and then.
Freeman, oh, right.
But yeah, and it suggested that we hear from them.
And then that is definitely in the bill. It has been in the
Was it
bill.
1.3?
1.3, and then that was added, but
Are they asked? Okay, so that's a change from the house. Okay,
that was changed from the government directive.
The Sergeant of Arms there's a process for capital bill requests, and she went through the process. And the governor did not include it in his list of priorities, and so the House added it.
okay,
You're gonna be looking at about $6 million plus, doing design work that's never gonna happen. I just want to make everybody aware of that. They're not gonna spend $18,000 to $22,000 on this project.
and you're talking about the entrance.
$18 to $22 million on the Central Way project. It's not gonna happen. And we've already spent like $1.5 million on adding a second story to the cafeteria that we've done design work and we spent the dollars. So now we're gonna be 1.5, 2.5, we're gonna be $3 million worth of plans for stuff that is not gonna happen. I'm also just gonna put it out there. This letter is very important to me for my support on the Capitol bill. I think it raises very big concerns about how you appropriate monies and where it can be used better within the bill. And it's gonna be a very, very big concern of mine.
Okay, well, I'm taking it seriously.
And Commissioner BGS next week.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, she's available, scheduling her, for Tuesday and Friday. And she might be able to also do Wednesday if we need her to. And then, Mira too, we'll want everything, possibly. Okay?
Great.
We're good? All right,